Hello, welcome to the first episode of the Nile and Gerry Tea, where we sip on some old tea, some new tea, some borrowed tea, and some tea from viewers like you. I'm Nile Joan Rivers. I am a Magic the Gathering content creator, streamer, commentator, and I am joined here and all the time by my good friend, Gerry Thompson. Gerry, how are you?
I'm good. You got a lot of titles. I'm just a dude who has a lot of podcasts. I just talk a lot.
Yeah. Gerry, known talker, known yapper, which makes you great for a tea sipping podcast. Now, Gerry, I have learned in my time in this space that you have a bit of history to you. This is not something I knew when you and I became friends. Not that it would have mattered when we became friends, but was a thing that just over time people would be like, Gerry's got a past. And I'm like, I don't, but I also don't really care. I care that he's like a cool dude right now. But with that being said, you've got a lot of Magic's history and lore behind you. I am much newer and fresh faced to the scene, but we have some tea, some exciting things that have happened recently that people have been all up in a hubbub about, and I am very interested to see what you, with the perspective of having that background in the space, feel about it. So, for starters, we have a situation. This happened at the Spotlight Series Atlanta, I believe, the standard tournament, where Nicole Dubin was playing a match. I believe at the point of the drama, we are in turns. Nicole casts a spell, taps her mana, fails to tap one of her lands for it. High pressure. We're in day 2, I believe, and just fails to tap this land. Ends up being very relevant as we get to her opponent's turn, realize the mistake. A judge comes, there's a long conversation, and basically what the judges decide is too much has happened. We cannot walk it back. And that extra mana that Nicole had that she wasn't supposed to have ends up being relevant. She's able to cast a spell that keeps her in the game when otherwise she wouldn't have been able to. And of course, a witch hunt on Twitter ensues. Everyone calls her a cheater. All this stuff. Just what are kind of your thoughts? Like a high intensity moment where mistakes are made or angle shooting. What is
Yeah,
your
I,
impression here?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say just with the information we have. Like, we weren't there. We can get
Mm-hmm.
both sides of the story, right? But is that going to be a perfect depiction, especially when those stories clash to some degree? And I don't. Hello, kitten. I am
This is
distracted.
Mitzi. She's perfect.
Yeah. I have a cat on my lap also, so the cats also love the tea. Yeah, it's tough to know for sure what happened. It is certainly very difficult to be able to confidently and factually say like this person cheated. Like, cheating in defined by the IPG is a very specific thing that does require intent. You cannot accidentally cheat. That is just not a thing. So I can make a mistake that ends up working in my favor. I can do that 10 times, 100 times. Maybe at some point you start looking at that and being like, something is up here or whatever. But in this one instance, it is really difficult to say whether or not someone did this maliciously, did it on purpose. So I don't think it is very useful to look at these sort of situations and just be like, did this person cheat or no? Because realistically, the answer is you don't know. You're not going to know. Given that I have been playing Magic for 25 years, like high level competitive Magic, there have been stories like this that start where it's like, oh, there's one instance of this person involved in something shady or whatever. Give it enough time. If they are shady, if they are a cheater, you will know. There will be enough stories out there, and I think at that point you can reasonably say that, okay, yeah, maybe something's going on here. But just off of one thing, I don't think it's worth it. And end of the day, I guess, if your goal is to make it so people are cheating less in Magic, like, you think that that would be really cool, and Magic should be game of integrity and fairness and whatnot, screaming on the internet is probably not the best way to go about and get that solution. So I'm also a little skeptical of people who say one thing and do the other, like, oh, I'm just trying to stop cheaters by just calling everyone a cheater on the internet.
Yeah, well, that's like the thing that I've noticed, even in, only playing competitive Magic for a few years, is to me, the people who are like definitely 100% cheating, cheaters, whatever, it's almost like a compulsion, it seems. Like they are going to do it. They're going to do it over and over and over. They don't care if they're on camera, like they don't care who's watching. It's almost like they have to do it. And so it's always a little weird to me when the first time someone's name has ever been in this sort of conversation, how many people are just like, this is obviously cheating. It has to be cheating. It couldn't possibly be anything but cheating. When, I mean, this game's incredibly complicated and hard. And, these events can be very high stress and there's a lot going through your mind. I don't know. I just feel like jumping to cheater is a very large leap that seems to get taken a lot.
It is for the first instance. I mean, it's how many times have you made like a game rules violation playing in tournament Magic or even just like casual Magic? Like these sorts of things happen.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of different reasons for why they may or may not happen. And just because one instance becomes somewhat high profile and it becomes kind of like fashionable to then dunk on this person, that doesn't necessarily mean that they cheated. Like you are just operating in bad faith at that point, and you are actively working against what you say you want in this scenario, where you're talking about you want Magic to be a cleaner game. You wish people would cheat less often. Well, like every time you just scream cheater at someone who maybe just made a mistake, you're kind of cheapening that and making it so, it's a boy who cried wolf situation effectively, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
someone is going to be actually cheating, someone's going to point it out, and it's going to be like, yeah, whatever, it's just another, Twitter witch hunt or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you take a lot of the credibility away from when it's actually happening. And, it's always tricky, I think, because the judges like can't really talk about it publicly. So you just have all these people who weren't involved saying this is obviously what happened. You have the people who maybe know the most about what actually happened just silenced publicly. And, it just becomes like, let's dogpile this person today. And, in the case of Nicole, I'm pretty sure this was like kind of a thing that broke her out of Magic a little bit, like so many of her friends and connections and stuff just sort of joined in on this dogpiling. And, that's a very isolating feeling to just be like, oh, you know, all of these people are dogpiling me, people I thought were my friends, my teammates, whatever. So, totally reasonable, I think, to just be like, maybe I won't play this game. But regardless of whether or not this is cheating or, you know, if there is intent behind it, what would you have done if you were Nicole and this occurred? How would you have handled it?
It's interesting because I think what I would do and maybe what I would expect the random person to do are very different things. Like I have been around for a long time. I think a lot of the reason that people try to, play high level Magic, especially when you've had like a little bit of success, is like, oh, I can do this, I can make a name for myself. This will be like a good source of pride and whatnot. And I've achieved those things. So like
Mm-hmm.
I'm mostly good with all that. And in any given tournament, I'm not super beat up one way or the other, given the results or whatever. Like in a lot of ways, it is stemming from a place of privilege, absolutely, where it's like I've won a pro tour or whatever before. Like I can afford to do the quote unquote good thing now, which would just be like, all right, I'm just gonna tap my land. Like to me, that's the very obvious solution because I would, in theory, like there to be more people who are willing to do things like that. But I recognize that there are folks in positions where, like, the tournaments mean a lot to them. They'd really like to qualify for the Pro Tour or whatever. And especially in Nicole's situation, she is just trying to go off like what the judge told her to do, which was just like the game is as it is, like play as it lies, right? And why would your first instinct to be like, oh, how can I just go against what this judge just told me? Like that's kind of a weird instinct to have, I think, for most people. So Yeah, I simply would have tapped the land. I would have been like, oopsie, my bad. I think obviously the best way to go about things like this is to never get into that scenario in the first place.
Mhm.
But it's tough. Those things do happen. So
Yeah, it is tough. And also, I feel like there's a lot of things in Magic tournament rules that boil down to what I think is putting players in very awkward positions. I think about this a lot with how missed triggers are handled presently, which, if you're
yeah,
unaware, the way that if let's say your opponent misses a trigger, you realize it much later. Let's say like on your turn, so many things have happened. You call a judge. What the judge is going to say is, do you, yourself, do you want to put your opponent's trigger on the stack now? And you have the option right then to either basically be like, well, you missed it, you're not getting it, sorry, or you're getting it right this second. And I think that puts the player in such an awkward spot. Like, I've been put in this spot many times, and I'm always just like, we are at a tournament and you did miss your trigger, but like, I also missed it. Like, we both like failed to maintain this game state, and like, do I like take this advantage? Do I give it to you? This actually happened to me at Portland, where this guy missed his third chapter Fable trigger. We didn't realize it till my turn. We call a judge. Judge says, do you want to put the trigger on the stack now? It was good for him to put it on the stack. Like, it was good for Fable to be flipped already. And I mean, I gave it to him partially because at the start of that match, he was like, "Oh my god, I love your YouTube videos," and I was like, "I'll give you any trigger you want, buddy. Like,
you
it's
got
all
it.
you. It's all you." But like, I just think it's really awkward. Like, and like Nicole's situation, like you said, she's possibly just trying to act in the boundaries that the judges gave her. And again, it is like this sort of awkward situation of, well, here's what like legally you can do. Now look your opponent in the eye and do whatever is most advantageous. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. It feels weird.
it is weird. Like the judge just comes up, like your opponent makes a mistake. The judge comes up
Mhm.
to you and puts you on the spot, and it's like, hey, do you want to be an asshole or not? Like
Yeah, 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 yeah.
we're gonna make this about you. It's like, what? How am I involved in this? What did I do? I'm just playing a game, you know.
Right. Like, why am I suddenly like the arbiter of these rules?
Yeah, exactly. Did you see Game 5 of the finals, or did you hear about this?
No. What
So
happened?
so Matt Nass is in a pretty good position in the domain mirror. His opponent casts an Atraxa, which is good, but may or may not get him out of this situation, right? And 4 cards deep into revealing cards for Atraxa, he says, oopsie, I missed my beanstalk trigger.
Whoa.
So there's 4 cards face up. And the judge
We're
comes over.
halfway through resolving Atraxa.
Yeah.
Like, 4
And
cards exiled.
the judge comes over and goes to Matt Nass and is just like, would you like to put it on the stack?
How does that even work? Do you draw the 5th card?
I don't know. I don't know if they're going to finish resolving it and then resolve the beanstalk thing if he did or not. But Matt was just like Magic players, we can be nerds, we can be awkward,
Mm-hmm.
we could be anti-confrontational. And
Yeah, yeah,
this is game 5 of the Pro Tour finals.
yeah. This is huge.
It's ludicrous. Like Matt felt so awkward and so bad. And I know from other people who are friends with him, they have said that he is the type of person to generally just like give it to people. But
Totally.
and then they also turned on like the player mic cams or whatever, the player mics.
Oh, come
And
on.
so he was just like, look, normally I would, but like this situation is just like a little too awkward, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, and ended up not giving it to him. But it's just like, that's just a bad look all around. Like, why is this Matt's fault?
Yeah. And like, I would do the same. Like, in that situation, even if they had sat down and been like, I'm your number one fan, I'd have been like, bro, we're 4 cards deep into Atraxa. I'm going to say no because I don't want to figure out if you're drawing this card or the top of your deck. Sorry, you're down
Well,
a card, but you're also
yeah,
resolving Atraxa. So, who cares?
right. I do want to mention real quick something that kind of, I don't know, just rubbed me the wrong way about this sort of situation. And I think that this could be an entire podcast topic, honestly, is
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
accountability. Like, if I miss a thing and it is clear that I have missed it, I have made a mistake and I'm willing to own that. I would rather die than be caught begging for an extra card on camera, you know? Like I will
Totally.
I will just never do that. I would die of embarrassment before that would happen. So what happened to accountability? What happened to just being like, oh, I did miss it, instead of trying to like weasel out of it, get the judges involved, put Matt on the spot, go through all this stuff? Why can't you just be like, my bad, I made a mistake, and you just move on from there? Why is that so hard?
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny because like you talk about like you've been there, done that with Magic. And so you feel like you have this place of privilege to be like, now I can just like play how I want to play. And like if I miss a thing, I'm missing it forever, like that kind of thing. And I reached a very similar conclusion, like I play very similar to how you do, but I have not been there. I have not done that, like I
Yeah,
have not won Pro Tours. I have not played for a fifth of the time that you've played. But to me, it is a thing of like almost the opposite, where like I have so little to prove, Like I would love to do great at a competitive event, but really what I love is proving to myself that I'm improving.
yeah,
And so when I go to a RCQ, an RC, a Spotlight Series, whatever, I'm never going in being like, I'm in a top 8, I'm going to win, like I need this, I want this. I'm always going in just being like, I'm going to play better Magic than I played last time I played Magic. And sometimes those are very specific goals. Like during Pioneer season, I was playing a lot of Phoenix, and I would have days where I'd go to an RCQ and be like, I'm not going to miss a single Ledger Shredder trigger today. Like that's my whole
Godspeed.
thing. I'm not going to miss a single one. And then, like I wouldn't miss a single Ledger Shredder trigger. I mean, that I'm aware of, who knows,
That
right?
you
But
know of,
like,
yeah.
yeah. But as far as I know, and I was like watching it like a hawk, I didn't miss any. And I didn't even end up top 8. Like I just bubbled out of top 8 in that RCQ, but I promise you I felt better than whoever won that RCQ,
Oh yeah.
because I was like, no Ledger Shredders missed, played it tight all day, felt incredible, felt awesome. So like I just, I don't know, I just like don't care, like if you miss a thing and it's good for you to have it, but like you should have gotten it, whatever, take it. If I screw up and somehow it ends up giving me an advantage, I'm just going to play like I don't have that advantage. And I think you did something very similar to what I'm talking about in Denver last year.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly the situation, so if you want to talk about it, I just know there was like an extra card situation.
Yeah. It was a funny situation. Real quick though, I will say, despite the privilege and all that stuff, like I have mostly played this way since even before like having success
Sure,
in
yeah.
terms of like accountability and whatnot, because I'm coming at things a lot of the way that you are, where I want to see improvement from myself, not necessarily just like, oh, I won a tournament or whatever, because that may or may not mean a
Right.
thing. Like if I played really badly, then am I going to feel happy about that? Probably not, but it's different for everyone. Anyway, yeah, RC Denver round 1. I'm playing this Rakdos pile of garbage as I do, and
Mm-hmm.
playing against the Living End, and so I have a Dothy Voidwalker and a Chalice of the Void in play. And because I'm a very smart deck builder, I also have Mishra's Bauble in my deck, and I draw Mishra's Bauble with my Chalice on 0 in play, and just not even really thinking, play the Bauble, use it. My opponent's like, yup. I see a land on top. I'm like, well, I want to fetch that away. I fetch down to 4, which I know is like kind of a precarious position because my opponent has a bunch of 4/4 flyers that she's trying to cast to kill me, seeing as how I have the Voidwalker in play, but don't want to draw land, right? So as I'm
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
shuffling, I'm like just looking around, and I notice the Chalice of the Void that's been in play since like turn 1 or whatever, and
Yeah.
realize that my bauble should have been countered. So I point this out to my opponent. We call the judge. Judge comes over, and it's just like, well, you've gone pretty far at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you gonna do? Just have to play it as it lies. Same kind of deal with Nicole's situation. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, but now I have this Mishra's Bauble delayed trigger coming up that I don't want because it is beneficial. And we've established that this should not be coming my way or whatever. And because whatever, the judge cannot determine whether or not a trigger is beneficial or not. And if I purposefully skip my trigger, I am then cheating.
Yeah.
Judge was just like, well, you got to draw that card. I was just like, this is so stupid.
It's so stupid. again, putting you in the like hot seat of like, here's the rules. You decide whether or not to like kind of be a dick to your opponent.
Well, yeah, kind of, but I did the opposite, I guess, of I think what a lot of people would do, where I was like, no, there's a way to get around this. There's a fix. If you have the confidence of a cishet white dude, you will also just be like, there's a way I can get out of this, which is just generally where I go all the time. Anyway, I was like, I can draw this card, but I don't have to use it. I don't have to pretend like it's there at all, right? So I just drew it off to the side while the judge is still there, because he was like, well, I'm pretty sure this guy's going to cheat. I got to watch him. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, this is in my hand. This is in my hand. It's face down off to the side, but don't worry, judge, it's in my hand. And the judge was like, well, you know that if, you get thought seized or whatever. I was like, oh, yeah, then it's in my hand for sure. Totally.
Right.
Totally there.
That's so sick. It's so like, it feels like malicious compliance, of,
Yeah.
like,
I was pretty pleased with that one.
That's really good. It's like staying within the lanes of the rules as you've been given them, but also like staying within the lanes of like how you want to interface with the game and like how you want to interface with your opponents.
There was
Very,
a similar
very
one.
cool.
There was a similar one a couple years ago with Martin Juza involving hardcast like Blightsteel Colossus, where he realized a turn too late that he was like a mana short or whatever. And then he basically did the same thing that I did, which may have been the inspiration for me doing this, where like he didn't want to just like be oopsie, attack you, you're dead or whatever. Him and his opponent agreed like, hey, this is here. I'm not going to do anything with it until I draw my land. Then I'll tap my lands, act like I just cast this thing, and proceed with the game normally. And that's what they did.
Yeah, that's sick. That's like, so I don't know. I love like acting within the rules of the game and the event to create the situation that was supposed to occur.
Yeah, if you can fix it, absolutely. The weird thing from my end in the Denver story was I did fetch down to 4 life. My opponent drew a 4-power flyer, and then I died a turn earlier than I should have.
That's great. Yeah,
it wasn't a perfect fix.
but you also like you had gotten advantage. Like even if they had said you don't have to draw the card, you had already gotten advantage off the bauble, right? Like because you knew you needed to fetch. Like you knew there was nothing on top.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But
I don't know.
But that I guess that's like a hindsight thing. Like I could have,
I mean,
like,
say
the card
much
was
you can do at that point, right?
Say the card was good and I passed the turn or whatever. Like then
Sure.
it kind of changes the whole dynamic, I think. But
yeah, then you can like fetch to be like, well, I'll fetch to like get the card that I know is there off of there. So.
Well, it depends because it depends when I would notice the chalice was in play, right?
Yeah,
because I noticed when I was shuffling. So if I just pass the turn, draw the card, oopsie, now I have this good
maybe
card
you
in my
don't even
hand.
notice it if you had a good card on top. Yeah,
maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, but so like that is how I typically try to interface with the game. That's how you try to typically interface with the game. And I mean, it really feels like the higher up in the like placing of tournaments, like at Pro Tours and at Worlds and stuff, it feels like this sort of thing is more common. But I mean, is there anything a person can do to like prepare themselves to try and like play in this way, because when you're in that moment, right, when you're like, I am playing for like top 8 of the RC and the judge has just given me an advantage that like I shouldn't have and I know I shouldn't have, and I've got like this angel and devil on my shoulder and being like, your opponent should have noticed it too, like you're well within your rights
the angel, by
as
the
a
way.
competitor. That's the angel. The devil just she's loafing down over there, but she was here a second ago. But then the other one just being like, no, that this is a game state that shouldn't exist, and you should play in such a way as best you can to like make it proper, make it whole. That's a really intense moment to have. What can people do to like prep for that? Can you prep for that?
Yeah, you got to take some serious like moral inventory in that moment, which is tough to do. And I think a lot of people walk away from spots like that not entirely satisfied with the outcome one way or the other. And you can try to act like what you would do in those scenarios, but it is really hard to tell until you're actually there in the hot seat in that moment. So I think the best way to go about it is to seriously think about it beforehand. And it's just like, what actually matters to you and what is going to make you not necessarily happy, but satisfied with how you conducted yourself in a situation like that, because you may be tempted in the moment unless you tell yourself beforehand, like, hey, if it ever comes down to it, like, I'm going to try and do the right thing because that's who I want to be as a person, that's what I want Magic to be, whatever. And I think that that's a great way to go about it. If you find yourself in that situation and you're still just like, the devil wins out, the devil is too charismatic, too charming, we take our top 8, it's like you have to live with that, that's
Yeah,
kind of on
totally.
you. But
Yeah,
realistically, best way to do it is to not get in those spots in the first place.
oh, totally. Totally. But I mean, like, that's the really hard part, I think, because the game is so complex and so hard. And I mean, it is easy to just like forget you've got the chalice on the field, like it is easy to mistap your mana, like all of these things are like very easy. And the part that's like so screwed about this is it gets easier as you're getting into these more intense moments, like it is easier, I think, to make that mistake when you are like fighting for your life for the top 8 than it is like round 1, just because
Yeah.
like you've been playing longer that day, the intensity's higher, there's more to keep track of. But yeah, I was also gonna say, like, thinking about it beforehand, I mean, I know you and I in Portland talked a little bit about like prepping for these events, because I came up to you seeking validation in my method of preparation, which is I have a kind of strict rule where I will not play basically any Magic the day before a like big event like the RC. And my philosophy, like my thinking on that is I have already done the learning that I'm going to do. And like jamming games the night before feels like cramming for a test for me, which just
Mm-hmm.
like in my experience never works. It's like, do I already know it? Or even worse, am I going to like fall victim to variance the night before, start freaking out, change my like game plans to something that's just worse, because I don't know, I played the same match against someone 50 times and like some weird stuff happened, like I feel like anytime I do that, anytime I play before a big event, I go into it and I'm like nervous and I'm overthinking, and I just find it so much better if I go into an event feeling really loose and just like happy and excited to like play Magic. Like I want to feel like I am playing a game. But part of that preparation, I think, like part of entering into the tournament with that like looser, I haven't been jamming 100 games mentality, I think better prepares me for these situations, because just like mentally, it's like I mentioned earlier, like I'm not going in and being like, I need to top 8 this event. I'm going in and being like, I need to play better Magic than I played yesterday, or I guess the day
Yeah.
before.
And I think that is great and demonstrates a lot of self-awareness, frankly. And unfortunately for me, I have not really figured out what works best for me, because I know that in the mornings I am definitely like rusty and sleepy and a little bit slow. And when and if I come out of that is seemingly at random. Like I've not been able to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I've tried, kind of like just relaxing the day before. I've tried not playing any Magic. I've tried trying to play like some warm-up games in the morning to like get my brain firing a little bit. And it's still just like actually go sit down for round 1 and I'm just groggy as hell and I don't know what the deal
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really tough. Like so much of like tournament play to me feels just dependent on like how's your brain working that day. That definitely often feels outside of our control. At the start of this, we talked about having some old tea, as you've been in this
Mm.
game for quite some time, and we're talking a lot about these sort of questionable things that happen on camera or around a big group with judges, whatever, that are very open to interpretation. And people love to jump and dogpile and call it cheating. And I know you have had situations in the past where, you know, seemingly sketchy things have happened on camera. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, you say sketchy, and honestly, watching it back the first time, like I first they told me about it, and I was like, no way, don't believe you. And then I watched it back, and I was like, damn, I am smooth. Like I would be a phenomenal cheater. Uh, there there was this match at an SCG Invitational. I don't know, like 2012 probably, because Delver was a thing. So yeah, that sounds right. And this is, I don't know, on topic. This is actually the same one that Alex won when we both made top 8. I was slightly ahead of him, I think, on points for player of the year. So he won player of the year, even though I knew he was cheating the whole time, like everyone did, basically. And then shortly after got banned. But this was my thing on camera in that event, either playing for top 8 or the round before playing for top 8 or something. And I'm gonna name some cards. They're not powerful cards. I assure you this was constructed.
Okay.
Pristine Talisman is a
Oh,
3-mana
hell yeah.
artifact. Taps for a colorless and you gain a life. Shimmering Grotto. There have been a lot of upgrades to this over the years. It taps for colorless and you can pay 1 and tap it to add a mana of any color. So you're paying an extra mana to like filter mana. I was effectively a blue-white control deck splashing 3 colors. And so my lands are like probably 2 Glacial Fortresses, a Sulfur Fall, or no, probably 3 Glacial Fortresses, like that type of thing. Like 2 blue-white duels, an island, Shimmering Grotto, Pristine Talisman. And I have a Nile Spellbomb in play also, your namesake.
That's me.
I played Nile Spellbomb in Portland, and I was going to ask you to sign them and forgot, but then you posted at some point like, oh, people keep asking me to sign these damn things. So I was like, all right, good.
Well, I love signing the Nile spell bombs. What comp grinders have started doing to like tease me is they'll have me sign any other spell bomb. They'll have me sign like an Aether spell bomb, you know, anything that's not the one that sounds like my name, which is very funny, I think.
I like that. Anyway, so I've 5 total mana on Nile Spellbomb. My opponent has a Geist of Saint Traft. Untaps, plays a Sword of War and Peace, equips it on the Geist, tapping out, and attacks me for roughly 1 billion damage. Sure. And after watching it back, I know what was going through my head, but it looks bad. It looks real bad. I go, I'm going to Ancient Grudge, the Sword of War and Peace. And so I do that, and then I tap the Talisman, the Grotto, and then like the basic. And that is just general order of operations for me. It's like, think about what I am going to do, announce the spell, tap the mana, use like the worst lands. I'm pretty good at doing that. You know, some people like tap all their duels and leave all their basics untapped. It doesn't make any sense, whatever. So in the middle of doing this, I'm like, oh shit, the Grotto is the worst land, but I need that to activate my Nile Spellbomb and draw a card. And so I had played the Grudge, tapped my mana, and then very smoothly like untapped the Grotto and tapped another blue-white source. And then end of turn, I cycle the Nile Spellbomb. You know, I was in a lot of trouble, but now I've used my mana pretty efficiently. I drew into a Phantasmal Image to kill the Geist. I go on to win the game. But yeah, someone points out like, yo, Jerry used that Shimmering Grotto twice, which is like not even a good thing to do generally, but I did it.
Yeah. What if you use your worst land twice?
Yeah. You know what happened as a result of that? Nothing.
You were not dogpiled? You were not crucified online?
Nah. Some people brought it up and they're like, oh, well, it's Jerry. He probably just made a mistake.
That's crazy. I mean, so give me like the landscape of like the online social aspect of Magic at the time. Like, would dogpiling someone who looked like they were cheating be a thing that happened? Like, were witch hunts happening then? Was the online scene even big enough?
There were certainly instances surrounding Alex, again, like same era, right? Where he would do some stuff, regrowing a cure out of the graveyard, the 2 explorers thing, like all of these things. And then much later, there was a lot of stuff on camera with like him brainstorming, not putting cards back, him brainstorming, drawing 4 cards, a lot of different stuff. And the Reddit posts would blow up. They would get a bunch of comments, a bunch of upvotes. Like they were definitely well seen, well shared by people. Alex was just like not really online or whatever. And
Sure, sure,
also is a person who has a lot of clout. And I
sure.
was in the same spot. And Magic was a lot smaller back then for sure, just like total number of people, but like
Yeah, yeah.
Magic Twitter was smaller too. I think maybe had like 12 or 15,000 followers now compared to like 40K.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Uh but yeah, there it had a lot of users. You know, like dog piles absolutely could have happened,
Sure. But you were
but
just like be, you because you had the clout of being Jerry T.
yeah,
People were just like, "Oh, he couldn't. He wouldn't. Not our Jerry."
yeah, no chance.
Now,
And I'm sure if it happened again, it would probably be more of the same. And then maybe if it happens the 10th time, then maybe people start to suspect something or whatever. But like, it was just one of those things where it's like, damn, I've built up a lot of goodwill, just like without
yeah.
even trying.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned this part of it because one of the questions we got from somebody ahead of this is from Sebastian Daniels, so thank you, Sebastian. Why does it seem like known players get so much leeway and their rude slash unsportsmanlike conduct just gets hand waved by their friends who are also known players instead of being called out for it? And that's like exactly what you're talking about.
A lot of it, yeah. I mean, realistically, I think it is a lot of folks who are in the middling sectors of competitive Magic are in a space where they want it bad. And
Hmm.
it is kind of like the dog chasing the car thing where it's like you're going to catch it and you still won't know what to do with it or whatever. But you don't even know what's going to make you happy. You just think like, "Oh, maybe if I win an RC or win a Pro Tour or whatever." And then you do, and maybe things don't change. You're still the exact same person. It's weird, but
Yeah.
they think they want it. They think they want the Twitter clout. They will do
Hmm.
anything to farm engagement and make number go up. Bigger number, better person. If I'm hanging out
True.
with people who have higher elo than everyone else, like then I'm cool, right?
That's right.
Uh
That's the best person at the table. Is the highest elo.
yeah. And I think that is just the main thing that is driving people. So yeah, this happened with a lot of people who are friends with Alex, where
Hmm.
he had all of this stuff, all this evidence against him, and people were like, nah, he would never. And it's just like, I don't know if you're trying to convince me or you, you know? Because it's pretty obvious. So like, what is the deal? Like, why do you want to just like take a bullet for this dude? And it is just because like, oh, I feel cool being around this person who is notable to some degree in this very niche, like tiny community. And even if part of the notability he has is infamy for cheating.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I mean, I think all of that definitely rings true, especially when we're talking about people known for cheating. But I think there's also an aspect to it of just like, I don't know, to me, it just kind of makes sense socially. Like if you are seen on camera doing something sketchy and you have 1,000 people who know you pretty well and know like that's not a thing Jerry would do with intent, I don't think. Like they're going to go to bat for you. And so it just makes sense to me that those people would get more leeway because they have like I don't know what to call it besides like the social capital of having proven to a bunch of individual people that they are trustworthy. And
Yeah.
maybe you can only do that so many times before those people start being like, well, I thought Jerry wouldn't, but it's like
Yeah.
the
I'm
20th
not gonna go
time
to
he's
bat for him
untapped this
anymore.
grotto. So I think part of it is like what you're talking about of almost a more insidious like I want to stay with the cool kids or whatever. I think part of it is just like if you earn people's trust, they will go to bat for you. I think unfortunately that sort of social capital is a big part of Magic and especially competitive Magic and the accessibility of competitive Magic.
Yeah, I think there are two different things though, where it's like I may have, for example, like my best friend go to bat for me, and then I may
Hmm.
have someone who is an acquaintance of mine go to bat for me because he like doesn't want his name to be ruined or whatever by
Hmm.
not having this big acquaintance anymore or whatever. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that that is mostly like what Sebastian is talking about. Where like, say So at the time, I did not have Pro Tour success quite yet. I had qualified for a bunch of them and gone to them, but no top
Sure.
eights or anything. And I was killing it on the SCG circuit. I think that in moments like that, you could have seen reasonable scenarios where like people who had more clout than me, like people who were in the Hall of Fame or whatever, could distance themselves and disavow because they're not losing out on much. Like if we're not super tight and I'm not providing that much value to them or that much perceived value, they can simply cut ties and they don't lose out on much.
Sure.
But if it is someone who has less social standing than me or even like equal social standing, you may find it harder to just renounce that relationship even if you see something that is like truly heinous.
Yeah, totally. I think there is a lot that goes into it, and I think it is also a thing that scales very awkwardly depending on like how big of a personality the person is,
True.
how big number is, how better the person is. Hopefully that answers your question, Sebastian. Thank you for sending it in. Our next one comes from my buddy Luke, which actually, Jerry, you and I commentated his girlfriend Jennifer winning an MXP with Yogg one time.
I remember.
Yeah, it was very sick. But Luke
Jennifer
writes in
sick.
and says, Jennifer was so good at Yogg. I was so hyped.
Yeah.
But Luke writes in and says, I think a good question to talk about on the tournament ethics would be, how much should knowing and following the meta rules be considered a part of the skill of playing the game? As in knowing / letting your opponents miss trample, triggers, etc. Some players consider it bad form to let an opponent miss a trigger or to miss a detrimental trigger and call a judge when they decide it's beneficial, such as with things like pack triggers. Is this part of the game or just the rules engine like you're playing on MTGO?
I'm kind of two minds on this, but it's like past Jerry and present Jerry feel very differently because over the years the landscape of Magic and tournament Magic has changed a lot, and that has certainly altered my perception on things. And I'm sure that if you would like read some of the stuff that I wrote in, I don't know, like 2010 or 2005 or whatever, it would sound very different from what I'm saying now. But like, I think back in the day, it was easier to ask people to understand the rules and know the interactions, and as a result, punish them harder if they messed that stuff up. Because generally, the people who were engaging in tournament Magic were not doing so casually. Like, you would go to a PTQ, and then next week there would be a PTQ like 3 hours away or whatever. It would be like the same 120 people almost every time because everyone was engaged in that lifestyle to the same degree. And I think it's easier to ask for a bigger buy-in at that point in terms of like rules knowledge and whatnot. And like, yeah, then that does sort of become some of the skill of the game if you are going to penalize people based on not knowing those things. Like, for example, there was a Grand Prix where I got a match loss for not registering my artifact lands. It was like my deck list had 37 cards, and I registered in the total column, but not the played column. And then it's like, you look at my deck. Obviously, I want the artifact lands, and the artifact lands are in my deck.
Right.
Like, there's no foul play.
Yeah.
I'm just a dummy. But back then, it was like, oh, you can't even fill out a sheet of paper. Match loss.
Yeah.
And
that's crazy.
Harsh, but on the other hand, like, I'm a moron. Like, why shouldn't that just be like a horrible penalty? Because I tried to not do it again. You know, that was pretty good incentive.
Yeah, great lesson to learn, I suppose.
I did do it again, unfortunately, because I'm still a dummy. But
oh no,
nowadays things are different. It's way easier for someone to just, play a little bit on Arena and then be like, oh, what is this FNM thing about, or like RCQ or whatever, and just roll up to a tournament not having a ton of rules knowledge, or like friends get them into the game. Like Magic is so much bigger and encompasses people whose engagement levels with it are so much different than they used to be 20 years ago, to the point where I think it is fine for them to be way more lax on things like this and not penalize people as much, and not consider knowing what layers are to be a part of the skill of the game or whatever. Like, we should not be testing for that. That's silly.
Yeah, so I've been working for a little bit on a video about what I've been referring to as magic code switching, which if you're unfamiliar with code switching, it is a language thing where, basically how you will talk differently around different groups of people. So like I will talk differently around like my queer friends than I will my family, or I will talk differently on Twitter than I do at my job, like those sorts of things. You change like literally how you speak and like your mannerisms to match like the people and environment that you're in. And I think we do the same thing in Magic as competitive players, where, or we should at least, where, what you are expecting if you sit down at like an FNM is different than what you're expecting when you sit down at the Pro Tour or an RC. And I think there are some places where that expectation gets a little blurry. And I think things like RCQs and RCs are some of those places where, like, obviously the expectation as we both sit down is we want to win this match, we want to win this tournament. But how badly we want to win and how seriously we are taking every single aspect of it might not necessarily line up where it probably would automatically if we were sitting down to play a match at Worlds together.
Yeah.
And so I think it's tricky, and I think it varies a lot based on like if I sat down to play, I don't know, anytime I sit down to play like one of my serious grinder friends, even at an FNM, we don't even have to say it. We both know that like we're locking in and taking everything like, seriously. And, like we are code switching from like, oh, I just played like a 14-year-old who this is their first FNM to like, I just played my buddy who's on the Pro Tour. So like, we're going to treat it like it's, comp REL at least. And I think figuring out where you two are meeting on that is like so hard. I think it's so hard. And it's not even like a thing you can discuss really. Like it'd be so awkward if you sat down at your RCQ and someone was like, do you want to miss triggers? Do you want to like, I don't know, low key angle shoot each other? Like,
No, this is like the
I don't
commander
know.
stuff, like the
Yeah, we need a
pregame
rule
discussion.
zero.
Yeah.
We need a rule zero for tournament Magic. How seriously we did like an REL between the two players.
I have a funny related story about money drafting in terms of
Oh
this.
hell yeah, I love money drafting. Hit me with it.
So money drafting, for those who don't know, used to happen way more often back in the day. Doesn't happen very much now, but it was generally like, oh, we all busted out of the tournament. What are we going to do? We don't really want to play side events. Maybe we're all qualified, whatever. So we'll just do 3-on-3 drafts. Maybe you do random teams. Maybe you have your squad of 3. You go find some other squad of 3. You put up like $20 a head and play for the money in the cards or whatever. And it's pretty fun. Generally, it was like, yeah, we treat this like comp REL. Like there's money on the line. We take it seriously. There's respect for the game involved, blah, blah, blah. And it, for the most part, that held true until Magic started blowing up a little bit more. And then suddenly people were like, well, I'm going to just do this little takesy backsy real quick. And I'm just like, well, hold on, because I just want to know where we're at. Like, if I do a little oopsie a couple turns from now, is that going to be cool? Or is this like a one-way street sort of thing? Yeah. And
yeah,
this dude is just like, hey, it's cool. If it's not a big deal, like takesies backsies. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then a couple turns later, his teammate is like prison rulesing my teammate because my teammate made a mistake.
That's crazy.
I was just like, what's going on? And he's like, well, that's him. That's not me. And so they're just getting it both ways. They're like holding us to stuff while taking their stuff back.
That's crazy.
And doing it on purpose.
We need like, competitive rule zero.
Yeah. I mean, I started
sit
doing
down at
that.
the money draft and say like, how serious we taking it?
Yeah. I started doing that because you kind of had to, because I just didn't want to be involved in those situations where it's like, all right, you're trying to take these backsies me, and like, where are we? What are the rules here? Someone just tell me. I don't care what they are.
Right. If we're playing takesies backsies, let's all play takesies backsies.
Yeah.
If we're not, then let's all not be.
Yeah, because I was under the impression it was one thing. Now you're trying to pretend like it's something else. Like,
well, it's also like, with something like a money draft, maybe you finish your game early and you go to help your friend and you're like, oh, we'll just take this back. And it's like, oh no, that's not cool on this battlefield. Like that was That's just impossible. That's impossible to keep up with. But yeah, there you go, Luke. Try having a Rule Zero conversation with your competitive opponents. Our last question of this episode comes from Yeoman5. Min Yeoman, Jerry?
Quite
Min the
well.
Yeoman?
Quite well.
Okay, great.
Big fan. Big
Mutual
Yeoman fan.
friend Yeoman5. Love Yeoman. Yeoman asks, how do you develop peers when many locally view you as an authority figure / undervalue their own opinions when discussing with you instead of pushing back and growing together? And I think this is one that you're going to have to answer because I do not experience this problem.
Yeah, it's funny because I get this both ways, where I have folks that are like way too deferential, and then I have some folks that just won't take any advice or want to be contrarian or whatever. That one is certainly more frustrating to me because they'll say like, "Oh, I recognize that I don't know a whole lot," but then will just like talk over me, not listen to me, tell me I'm wrong or whatever. It's like, okay, well, that is certainly going to change how I'm going to engage with you. I'm just not going to try and help you at all because clearly you do not want to get better, or you do not want help from someone that you perceive to be like better than you or whatever. But for their situation, I mean, I think that assuming Yo Man is talking about himself,
Surely.
he's in a pretty good situation, I think, assuming that their goals are aligned and, you know, like everyone involved does care about getting better and just like learning and growing. And I think that regardless of skill level, someone like kind of new to Magic or maybe a lapsed player or whatever, or someone who has played casually for a long time, like they are probably going to know some stuff that even someone who's been playing for like a decade is not going to know, you know, or they're going to have like more experience with a certain kind of archetype where maybe you want to pick their brain a little bit, you know, like there's always going to be something where you can help each other. And I think being self-aware about those things and knowing what your strengths are is very valuable. And there should be like a difference in communication, like the, you know, like when you say a sentence on the internet and you put the little tag at the end or whatever. What's that called?
The /s, like the sarcastic tag, like those.
Yeah, kind of, where it's like I'm saying this thing and I'm like high confidence about it or whatever because of like
Yeah,
XYZ
totally,
reason kind of thing. Like that should be taken differently than them saying their opinion where they're pretty well informed and they know, or pretty uninformed and they know that, you know. So like you learn these sort of things. I went through this with one of my other podcast co-hosts, Dave, where like we'd been friends for forever, but we started working on this podcast and talking to each other weekly, and it was like we just don't know how to communicate to each other at all. Like I'll say a thing and he doesn't know if like I'm high confidence, mid confidence, low confidence or whatever. And it's just, look, he's a Boston dude. He just like yells at his friends all the time and is like, you know, everything is like the nut high or the nut low or whatever. And I try to temper my words a little bit. So he was just like, I don't know what you're saying half the time. You know, you always sound like you're wishy-washy. I'm just like, nah. So it's, yeah, that sort of thing is a learning experience that you have to go through. But like it is just worth the direct conversation a lot of the time. But if Yo Man is in a spot where he does feel like he is the kind of like authority figure locally, I mean, he should be at least a little bit good at spotting out people's strengths and weaknesses, like things that those people might not even understand themselves, and bring that up, tell them, like that could provide like a little bit of confidence boost to them, or like maybe give them a sort of like special area of expertise to work on, like, oh, I do kind of like inherently understand these aggro decks more, maybe I should be working on those a little bit more and using my time to refine those for the team or the group rather than doing this like, I don't know, dirtily combo stuff or whatever. And
yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective to be like kind of lean in to the authority figure thing, but not in a way of like, you know, Yeoman knows best, but in a way
yeah,
of like helping people spot their own strengths and your own weaknesses, you know, of just being like, oh, you're really good at this. Can you help with that? I'm not very good at that part of the game, you know, like that's a very cool idea.
yeah, I mean, you can be a sort of teacher or Sherpa or whatever, but like ultimately you want to raise these people up, get them closer to your level, and then hopefully benefit as a group, right? And yeah, just being able to like cultivate the specific things that people are good at, I think could maybe save a lot of time on that journey. And I don't know, maybe a person is good at aggro decks and doesn't really care for them. That's cool too. Like, definitely have them engage in it in a way that is the most fun for them and the most rewarding and enjoyable and whatnot. But I think there's a lot you can do there in terms of like how you go about things, but definitely focus on hyping people up for sure. And like, it sounds like a lot of these folks just need a little bit more confidence, and you probably know the types of things that you can say to them to help with that.
Yeah, this is really interesting to me because I feel like I have almost the opposite problem that Yeoman is describing, where people do know me like locally and online and stuff, but because of how they know me, you know, like they know me as like magic shit poster. They know me as like makes new player focused content. They know me as like content creator. They don't really think of me, I think, as like competitor, regardless of how much like time or effort I put into that part of it. And so I find, you know, it is much harder to just have my opinions taken seriously at all. And a lot of times I'm like, man, I'm going to like text Jerry and have him text this to you, and then like you'll believe me. I think I could take like a similar approach to what you're describing and just like, I don't know, have more direct conversations with people of being like, hey, I think I am particularly good at like this thing, you know, like I think I'm better at making this mana base than you. And like, here's by math to prove that this is the mana we should be running. And like,
Mm.
I don't know if at that point they're like, vibes are off, then it's just like, okay, well, I've done what I can, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if you post a thing and you're like, I don't know, this is what the mana base that I've been running, shrug, then they're probably not going to take it seriously. But if you're like, yo, this is actually the thing that I'm good at, high confidence, like seriously, someone look at
Mm-hmm.
this, right? Like, those things are going to come across differently. I mean, ideally,
Right,
maybe
right.
maybe they don't, but
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like another we need a rule zero conversation. All of this just boils down to communicate more and more directly and
yeah,
better, you know, which feels like the panacea for so much of life.
yes, I'm right there with you. That's why I have so many podcasts. Love communicating.
Yeah, well, I think that is all the tea that we have this week. So thank you, Jerry, for spilling it and sipping it with me. We'll be back in another week with more tea, old and new, and from you. If you have any questions or things you would like us to talk about or answer, feel free to send them to any number of places. My Twitter at Nile Joan Rivers, Jerry's Twitter at G3RRY. I'll put it in here, you know. You know Jerry's Twitter. Or you can email, I'll put a bunch of links in the description and stuff below. There's like a thousand ways you can contact us. But this was great. Thank you for talking to me, Jerry. Before we go, we'll have a quick word from our sponsors. Just kidding. We don't have any sponsors
Yet.
yet. Yet. It could be you. It could be you.
DMs
Uh,
open.
DMs so open. Never been more open. That's all I got. Bye.